Morning, community and friends. Welcome to the weekly dot.LA strategy session. My name is Annie Burford and I head the events here at dot.LA. Although we cannot convene in person, our journalists and events team are committed now more than ever to keeping the community connected, informed, and engaged minute to minute. Today we will be discussing venture on the front line of COVID-19. How are investors directing capital to health startups that will change the post-COVID-19 world? As the health space rises in prominence, both to address the immediate crisis and to build tools for the longer term, players are facing a new challenge and opportunities. Before we dive deeper into the subject and commence the discussion, a few housekeeping items. All attendees will be muted for the duration of the strategy session. The speakers will be displayed on video throughout the discussion. Audience engagement and questions are encouraged. At the bottom of the screen, you will see an icon for Q&A, raise hand, and chat. Please feel free to submit any questions you have in the Q&A section. Rachel will field these questions to the speakers in the last 15 minutes. We will not be utilizing a raised hand function. A recording of the strategy session will be posted on the dot.LA website by the end of the day. Please make sure to sign and subscribe to the dot.LA daily newsletter to catch every headline. Without further ado, I'm excited to introduce dot.LA's reporter, Rachel.
Thanks, Annie, and thank you to all the guests. Oh my goodness, there's a lot of feedback there. Okay, looks like that's been resolved. Hi, my name is Rachel Uranga. I'm a reporter with dot.LA. I'm really excited to host with I can't think of a better panel to discuss this today. I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves, and we'll just go around virtual table. And let's start with Llewellyn Cox, who is a general partner at stage venture capital firm Mars Bio. Llewellyn?
Hi, good morning. Yeah, my name is Llewellyn Cox. By background, I'm a molecular biologist. I did a PhD back in the UK before moving to New York about 15 years ago. Since then, I've gradually moved into more of an entrepreneurial lifestyle, and most recently actually have come around to now being a general partner at Mars Bio, which is an early stage pre-seed and seed VC firm focused on biosciences in Los Angeles. I'm also an adjunct professor at USC, so we've got both big universities here, teaching translational biotechnology and science communications.
Great. Jay Goss, general partner at Wavemaker 360 Health. Jay?
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having us. Nice to talk to everybody today. So I'm Jay with Wavemaker 360 Health. We're a seed stage primarily and 100% focused on healthcare venture fund based in Pasadena. About a third of our portfolio is LA or Southern California. A third of our portfolio is up in the Northern California Bay Area, and then the rest of our portfolio is around the country and a little bit around the world. We only look at healthcare companies. And my background, I guess, pre-VC is all around the entrepreneurial journey. So I'd worked with and for a whole bunch, several dozen early stage companies, mostly Southern California companies since my mid-20s up until about 5 minutes before launching this fund. So I spent most of my career actually on the other side of the table, getting early stage companies off the ground, raising capital for them and getting them to the proverbial next level.
Great, fantastic. And Dr. Jeffrey Klausner is a professor of epidemiology at UCLA Fielding School of Public Health and a professor in the Division of Infectious Diseases and the program in Global Health at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. That's sort of a mouthful, but Doctor, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, my name is Jeff Klausner. As mentioned, I'm a professor of medicine and public health at UCLA. And I've been at UCLA for about 8 years. I run a research program developing diagnostics and evaluating interventions to prevent and control infectious diseases. Prior to that, I was this medical officer with the CDC in South Africa for about 3 years. And then prior to that, I was a health officer in San Francisco for about 15 years and also a faculty member at UCSF. Currently, the medical director of Corva Laboratories, which is a new venture with Curative, which is a laboratory COVID-19 testing startup. And we're basically day 18 now of this company. And this startup is doing all the testing for first responders in Los Angeles County and supports all the drive-throughs. We went from 0 tests to about 5,000 tests a day in 18 days.
Yeah, pretty amazing. And I'll just start off there because COVID-19 has changed the way everybody does everything, from how we get our food, how we go to the doctor, and so forth. How has it changed your lives, and when did that happen? And I'm specifically, obviously, talking about what you do day to day with your work. Do you want to start, Dr. Cluster? Yeah.
Sure. So, you know, for me, I mean, in terms of my clinical work, we moved from face-to-face encounters to telehealth and telemedicine. I think that's actually was a long time in coming, but a lot of doctors and institutions were not necessarily comfortable or trained with that. And there were some issues with payers and reimbursements for telehealth visits. But now that's kind of blown out of the water in terms of the barriers. And right now, more than 2/3 of our visits at UCLA Health, which covers 500,000 patient lives, are done through telehealth. So that's going to be transformative in, you know, the kind of direct-to-patient care world. And then, you know, secondly, my, you know, day-to-day research funded by NIH has been somewhat put on hold as we've pivoted toward, you know, doing research and test development for COVID-19 detection. Ultimately, you know, trying to develop home collected tests where we could use distribution systems like Amazon.com to get a test kit box in someone's house. They do a self-collected swab that goes through the U.S. mail or whatever carrier may exist in the future, and people could go online and get their test results in a couple of days.
Great, great. And I'm going to jump back to those thoughts because I'm interested in sort of diving deeper into that. Llewellyn, you want to talk about how this has changed what you're doing?
Sure, yeah, and it's kind of interesting because I think our personal lives were more disrupted than our professional outlook at the start. So, you know, as this situation started to really evolve towards the end of February, you know, it became really apparent to our team that, you know, there were some deep dysfunctionalities out there that were preventing an effective response being you know, put forward. And so in the first week of March, we actually convened this what we call a task force. We put together a website, COVID-19-response.com, to solicit ideas to try and solve some of these issues that we were seeing, whether they were supply chain or access to test kits or any of the various things within our world that were happening. At the same time, we were really early personally on social distancing. Myself, I have cystic fibrosis, so I'm a high-risk individual, so I should stay away from public gatherings. One of my colleagues has, you know, elderly you know, parents who he's very close to. So, you know, we were kind of very early on making sure that we weren't interacting and going kind of virtual with our operation. But yeah, at the same time, you know, we decided that, you know, we had a lot of potential to help out by, you know, convening people with ideas, with people with assets and financial support. So various things went on. We were, I think, pretty lucky with the early work of that task force. We were, you know, fortunate to be able to connect Curative with Corva, which, you know, as Dr. Klausner can tell you a lot more, has been a really, you know, wonderful collaboration. So we're, you know, kind of very proud to have been able to assist with helping them in their
I think did you go on silent? Is everyone else?
Yeah, I can't hear Llewellyn anymore.
So Llewellyn, I think you were muted out for some reason. Apologies.
I'm sorry, I had just had a notice that I had an unstable signal, so I don't know where you lost me.
Okay, great, good to hear.
but yeah, we were able to connect up with another group, Help with COVID.com, that was a similar group up in the Bay Area, trying to solicit ideas and connect them with volunteers and financing. And so it's been, you know, March especially was a really busy month, just trying to keep on top of helping people who have really cool ideas connect with the right people to make a real difference in the early stage. Now that we're kind of beyond that, what I'll call the acute phase of this situation, and we're kind of getting more into the chronic kind of stage of the public outbreak, we're somewhat pivoting back to being a more traditional VC and looking more focused at, or certainly for me, looking at companies that have you know, ideas that can help you know, with the second, third waves of this issue. And frankly, you know, working on technologies that can prevent this kind of problem happening again.
Really interesting. Jay, I'm interested in hearing how this has changed, how you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, so we had I thought I'd share a reflection we had. We had an all hands on deck meeting yesterday, the whole LA team, and then some of our partners that are elsewhere in the country. And the number one reflection we had is just kind of the observation that in the business model of a VC, this is what we do anyway. I mean, we do, you know, Llewellyn and I probably do 1,000 Zoom calls a year. And so we're going to continue to do 1,000 Zoom calls a year. And when we're not doing that, we're meeting entrepreneurs at Starbucks. So we're not doing the Starbucks thing as much, but it's a business model that's not terrible, with one exception, which I'll make mention of here in a minute. It's a business model that's not terribly affected operationally by COVID. And the one exception, which is worth kind of putting a little spotlight on, is the number one thing we like to do, and most seed stage funds have the same philosophy, is really get to know the founders that we're investing in. So we can do introductory meetings, we can run through PowerPoints, we can do all of the steps along the diligence pathway that we normally do. But at some point in that journey, we would normally have invited the company out to spend a little bit of time with us in person here in Los Angeles, or we'd have gotten on an airplane and gone and seen them at their location. And that's the one step that's really missing. And it's a really important step. And we're wrestling with how to compensate with it. If there's entrepreneurs on the phone here, I would encourage you to think about how can you compensate for the fact that you're not going to get to spend time. We're not going to go out and have a meal together. We're not going to get to kind of know each other's character as much. And that's something that's diminished by Zoom. So that one singular point is a real bummer and aspect that is slowing down our process in a fund that otherwise is moving as fast, if not faster, than it was pre-COVID.
Sure, and maybe you can talk a little bit to that point. Why would you say it's moving faster than pre-COVID?
Well, our particular fund is only, you know, prior to COVID, without knowing COVID was around the corner. Certainly, we don't take any credit for being for seeing this coming, because we didn't see it coming. But as we look at a portfolio now with 29 companies, there's only 2 of the 29 that are either hurt by COVID or COVID neutral. The other 27 are ironically better off today than they were before COVID, primarily because their value proposition is stronger today than it was then. And if you're investing in telehealth, if you're investing in remote patient monitoring, if you're investing in all those kinds of things, which is what our fund invests in, the world needs more of that, and is aware that it needs more of it than ever before. So we're being pulled to move faster, even to the point of accelerating the timeline on our next fund. Instead of slowing down and raising our next fund later this year, we're raising our next fund now, which we wouldn't have otherwise have done. But the world is more aware of the need for healthcare, which has always been there, of course, but now more people are paying attention to it, and they're less paying attention to the need for electric scooters or whatever else VCs would typically invest in.
So you're saying now that LPs are more willing to spend money on healthcare investment? Is it venture capitalists are more apt to invest in this industry?
I can't. I mean, again, you got to kind of divide venture capitalists into those that are healthcare focused, the two VCs on the phone here are going to have a different perspective, I would certainly expect, than a venture capitalist that's got a industry agnostic fund. They're probably much more likely to be conservative, depressed, and slowing way down. Whereas if you're focused on healthcare, that's the one aspect of our economy that's, mathematically expanding, right? We will spend more money on healthcare in 2020 than we otherwise would have, whereas we'll spend less money on just about every other sector of the economy than we otherwise would have. So yes, our LPs are encouraging us to do more, and we're seeing more and more companies that are either originally kind of fighting the COVID fight, or they've pivoted a little bit to be part of the COVID fight.
Sure. Is that what you're seeing as well, Llewellyn?
Yeah, for sure. We're much more focused, not so much on things like digital health. Big picture, Mars Bio invests in biology as technology. So certainly in the healthcare space, just like Jay said, it's probably improved the prospects of some of our portfolio companies. Others have, we're in the middle of what I'm calling the great pivot right now. A lot of people have managed to refocus what they're working on towards COVID, especially people whose technologies overlap with aspects of antiviral technology or vaccines, and certainly it's changed the value proposition for some of those cases. Frankly, vaccines were a very, very hard thing to fund 2 or 3 months ago. There's in a pre-February 2020, world, there's not that great a value proposition from an investment point of view in investing in a vaccine company. Obviously, that value metric has completely turned upside down now. And I think one of the things that I think is very interesting about what we're seeing in the market is like I mentioned earlier, those kind of second wave, like what comes after we have an initial vaccine. There's clearly problems in, the fact that it takes 9 months to produce the seasonal flu vaccine. Most people in epidemiology and public health understand that, that scale up time is something that's hindering, and it hasn't really bitten us yet. This is a great example of what happens when you have long production times. Even once we have a safe and effective vaccine, it's going to take some time to ramp up production of that. And so that's something that the other side of our portfolio, we also have interests in food and agriculture and in manufacturing. And definitely there's a lot more interesting, rapid scale up technologies, biomanufacturing, things that can actually make biological entities such as vaccines, cheaply and rapidly. So it's definitely, from like Jay mentioned, a lot of our companies, it's probably improved their prospects. And secondarily to that, even on the food side, we're seeing a lot of interest from LPs. To take this all back, pandemics, especially viral pandemics, are 100% are a function of human activity. And I am not a vegan, but I've been I completely agree with many of my vegan friends that this outbreak can be completely traced back to the fact that we have mass animal agriculture, and that provides the seeding ground for these viruses to breed, to move between species, to cross into the human's food chain. So there's even interest in those what comes next companies. How do we continue to increase, protein for food production without having to rely on these big, dirty, disease-spreading industries such as animal agriculture? So that's, from broadly on the portfolio, there's a lot of different aspects where things have changed, but oftentimes for the, like Jay said, it's actually making things easier for some of our companies.
Sure. Dr. Klausner, did you want to jump in there? Did you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not going to agree that this outbreak is related to the food agriculture industry, but I would say a big untapped sector, if we're thinking about opportunity, is public health sector. So there really has not been a functional public health sector with any kind of investment in decades. And, that's going to be presenting a lot of opportunities, a lot of, federal and state investment, and it is completely, wide open for innovation. Particularly on the technology side. So as a kind of a researcher in this area, we for 20 years we've been developing kind of internet applications and smartphone apps and different tools to do these things that people are just starting to learn about, called contact notification, called tracing, called monitoring of isolation activities, and really. People are not very conversant with that, and the current paradigm for how to do that is still hiring humans to go out into the streets and knock on doors, and that's the same process we've had for a couple hundred years as we've done this. So I think that this area, in terms of information technology, communications, is going to be the Wild West, in the beginning, as people race to deploy new tools in that area. But I see that as having tremendous opportunity, but also tremendous value. That people recognize that we haven't had a functional public health system, and that's something that we do need to invest in and rebuild.
Well, certainly COVID-19 exposed a lot of deficiencies in the healthcare system. I think that we would have never seen that are just mind-blowing. If you would have told me 3 months ago that the governor of New York is basically going to merge 200 hospitals, I wouldn't have believed you. But yeah, we're seeing all these changes in response. And I guess I want to kind of drill down on that. I mean, maybe hospital sector. I mean, what have we seen there that what has this exposed us to, and what kind of opportunity is there in that area? And then maybe we can kind of take a look at some other sectors, or if you want to mention any. I'm also curious a little bit about how we've seen things scale as we've seen regulations lifted. So maybe we'll start with hospitals, Dr. Klausner, since you were.
Well, I think, in the hospital sector, I mean, the thing that's been striking to me is our surge capacity and, our ongoing, demand on the system, whether it be, elective procedures or non-urgent procedures. So, these hospitals are, huge businesses that are doing, activities that on a, may have value in terms of, return on monetary investment, but somewhat have limited value in terms of, human improvement. And people have recognized that there's different things we do. Some things may be, less important. And because we've identified we have that surge capacity, I think it's going to cause people to kind of reassess, what we really need to be spending money on, and, prioritize having the ability to respond to the epidemics and also to decentralize our responses. So we've learned one of the tragedies in northern Italy, and the contributions to that, was that they didn't really have a strong kind of primary or middle care health system. So everyone who had COVID-19, anyone who had any symptoms whatsoever, were hospitalized. So they had a big investment in these kind of, end of the road health services, but they had a very weak and limited kind of primary care system and, decentralized health system. And, I think we'll be able to realize the benefits of trying to spread out the health to a much more community level, have much more community monitoring and community access to health. And I've always felt, we've seen in vaccinations, people can go to, pharmacies and drugstores and the, chain stores for vaccination. We should be seeing more of that in terms of, rapid diagnostics, in terms of, more access for these, rapid medical assessments, and try to, lower the system from this marble temple of the hospital and people in big white coats to, more on the ground community health and community health activity.
Great. Jay, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I especially agree with the last part of that. I'm not so sure I think or even want America to change the way it consumes healthcare. It is true that we consume healthcare services differently than most other countries in the world. And I don't see that changing anytime soon post-COVID. But I do really see us, and Llewellyn said it, it's what comes next. Most of our attention right now is a fund. Most of our attention in the headlines is focused on what comes now. Like, how do we get ourselves out of this jam right now? But as soon as we see the light at the end of that tunnel, everybody's going to start focusing on what we internally call, COVID-20, the next one. We need to make sure as an industry this never happens again. And a lot of that is what Dr. Klausner was just talking about, which is reimagining the continuum of care and sort of not making the thing we call a hospital less important, but working on all other places where care takes place, whether it's the pharmacy, whether it's the dental practice, whether it's the home, whether it's the SNF, whether it's all those different buildings, if you think of them as physical structures along that care continuum. That's got to be reimagined because we didn't have it right. We have an aging population. We're going to be older tomorrow than we are today. So we've already got sort of the wind in our face when it comes to that. And we're going to continue to get older as a country for another 5 years. So until we start going down that other side of that bell-shaped curve, even without a pandemic, we have more pressure on the healthcare system this year than we did last year. We'll have more pressure on the healthcare system in 2021 than we did in 2020 because of the aging population and the simple fact that human beings consume more healthcare services as they get older, and we have more older people, not fewer older people as a percentage of our population. So we're going to have to at some point start to focus on what comes next. We're not working on that quite right now. Most entrepreneurs aren't, most large organizations aren't, the government isn't. But at some point we have to do it. I mean, we had a sobering stat. I mentioned 2 of the 29 companies in our portfolio aren't doing well because of COVID. And one of them helps, and no one's writing about this, but it's one of the sectors of healthcare that's getting crushed. And that's the sector that's in the business of doing clinical trials. There's thousands and thousands of clinical trials in this country alone that had the pause button hit 6 weeks ago. And all of that science behind all of those clinical trials aren't happening because the clinical trial machinery can't work because the rest of the healthcare system is in crisis mode. But we don't want to be in a society where science is not advancing. We don't want to put all the science that's behind all those clinical trials on hold because the clinical trials, the apparatus can't continue to function. So we will start to work on, Llewellyn's words, we will start to work on what comes next very soon and make sure that when COVID-20 comes around, whether it's 6 months from now or 60 years from now, we do a better job responding to that one than we did to this one.
Great. Llewellyn, why don't you take that question? But I think what we're all sort of getting at too is what is post-COVID-19 investment going to look like? And not only investment, but the healthcare landscape. It looks like it's going to be different, and that we're going to be learning a lot of things, like not only about how we go about caring for people, maybe even who is cared for. I think this also exposed differences in class, race, geography, where you live, how people access care, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, right?
Sure.
But I think one thing that's almost universally true about crisis situations, especially those that happen on a very big scale, is they tend to exacerbate changes that were already happening. And I think that some of the things that we've kind of seen, whether it's healthcare or beyond, in the last month and a half or so, have really reflected that. The growth of virtual things like this, using Zoom, it's something we've been doing for a while, and people have written many op-eds over the years about the growth of distance work and work from home, and it's been growing, but it's still been somewhat niche. Suddenly it's all here all at once. And I think that's true for a lot of the things that, you know, we deal with as an industry. You know, as Jay was saying, like with telehealth, you know, it's been, people have seen the value proposition for a long time now, and, you know, people have been investing in it, and many companies are building some really, really, you know, useful products. But it's taken, you know, this situation to really showcase the value of those kind of things. And I think one of the things that when we think about what happens when we open up again, you know, it's, you know, there's obviously a lot of political debate. You know, it's not like turning on a light switch, but I do wonder how willing certain industries, certain groups, and it's not going to be universal, but how willing certain people are going to be to go back to the old way of doing things. And I think in some ways that some of these changes will stick. And the second thing you mentioned, I think is one of the biggest questions. And the second half of this year is certainly going to be interesting from a policy point of view, because this situation has exposed a complete rift in society, in the haves and the have-nots. And I think a lot of people have been, you know, unpleasantly surprised to find out which side of that line they fall on. And, you know, this is a great challenge. You know, it's a challenge. There's no doubt that economic disparities, racial disparities in this country have caused some groups to suffer disproportionately more than others. And if we want to get back to anything approaching normal, you know, healthy society, those things really now have to be dealt with. And I think another thing that's true, I was talking about this with friends yesterday, is look outside, the air is clean and nice. You know, I really do wonder that, you know, as, you know, hopefully as we get past this initial thing and people start going back to a more normal kind of working, as we see the air thicken up and get turbid and choky again, are we going to be happy about that, or is that going to spur, you know, a new environmental, you know, renaissance? Because, you know, environmentalism and sustainability, they're very difficult concepts to, you know, functionalize for your average person. You know, it's one of the problems we have with, you know, the whole idea of climate change. It's so big and amorphous. It doesn't really mean anything to your average person, you know, shopping at Walmart. But, you know, looking out the window, you know, I could see Palos Verdes from, you know, my house. You know, that's never happened in the 10 years I've lived here. I do wonder how some of these really visceral experiences of this situation might change kind of the public's attitude to some of these issues going forward. And like I say, I think it's going to exacerbate changes that are already underway in society. But I think it's one of the great unknowns. You know, where do people go from here? And I think that's something that is, you know, as VCs, our job is kind of to, you know, look into the crystal ball a little bit and imagine how value is going to work in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. I think these are really important things to kind of keep in mind to see how, you know, how big picture we respond after the fact.
Dr. Klausner, I know you're thinking about even the next day as the state looks to put in place a plan for how we slowly peel back some of these stay-at-home orders. I mean, you could put on your short-term and long-term hat. How do you see this sort of impacting the future? I mean, not only, I guess, just healthcare, right? We're talking about some of these visceral experiences that we have.
Yeah, so I think as I was listening to Llewellyn, it made me think, I think the home is going to be ascendant. So I have 3 kids at home. 2 got terminated early from college, and 1 is a high school sophomore. And they all are regularly aggressively working out on their mirror. And so now we have a, you know, interactive home gym that they all love, and my wife loves. We're doing home, you know, work interactions. We're doing home education interactions, and we're, you know, my, you know, research and program is doing more, you know, home testing and home collection of specimen and home diagnostics. So to me, it sounds like, you know, we're going to be in this ascendant home, which is also going to cause people to, you know, want to make their homes nicer, make their homes more interactive. And, you know, businesses are going to, you know, recognize that they can actually maybe have more efficiency by enabling, a certain kind of, information workers in particular to, work from home, to educate from home. And that actually has potential impact on this area around climate change. And, we were talking prior to this in our little warm-up session about how wonderful it is to drive around Los Angeles right now with very little, traffic. And that's because people are working, schooling, and, doing their healthcare at home. So, to me, I think that's kind of an important place that we're going to be, heading towards. So if I was thinking, I'm not an investor and I don't do, I don't think from that, perspective all the time, but I would think about, things that are going to make people have a better engaging experience and all the different things they do at home, whether it be healthcare, exercise, shopping, food. I mean, we've seen the, online, delivery services for, merchandise and supplies and other kind of commodities just, take over everything else in, retail. I think, there'll still be some need for socialization and, face-to-face religious and social and entertainment, but we are heading toward, because of this and probably a lot faster, a more kind of home-based culture.
Jay, do you want to add anything there?
I think that's true. I hope it's not wildly true personally, because I'd like to be able to go on a hike and not have to duck under the yellow caution tape at some point again in my life. But look, we were kind of going there a little bit anyway. And my family's observed this. If this had to happen, kind of thank God it's happening when it does, because we do have capabilities that we wouldn't have had this happened 25 years ago, mostly related to the internet, of course. But we can survive and even thrive a little bit at home in a way that we couldn't have done 25 years ago. But home health is a paradigm, which I think is where Dr. Klausner is also going with that. That's been a bigger and bigger area of focus for a long time, because people generally, just sticking to the healthcare theme here, people generally prefer to be taken care of in their home. You'd prefer to have your physical, from physical therapy to your last days on earth, you'd prefer it to be at home. This isn't COVID related. I would have always, every time I blew out my knee in a ski accident and I got surgery and then I had some physical therapy, I would have loved it if my physical therapist could have knocked on my door of my home or my office and done my physical therapy right there in my real estate, not going to the physical therapy clinic. I would have loved to have had telemedicine my whole life. I mean, all of these things are consistent with more health being done at home. And we have a lot of, they're almost business models now that exist in the years leading up to COVID that never existed before, that can allow us to do more and thrive more at home, and in some cases at the office, without having to go to the place where we traditionally consumed our healthcare services, which was a clinic or was a hospital, or was a business that we got in our car and drove to, or used public transportation to get to. So that people have said it many times. I've read it many different articles in the last couple of weeks. Just zeroing in on telemedicine. Probably telemedicine has been helped and advanced more in the last 6 weeks than it had in the previous, well, usually I see in the previous 6 years, but I'll take that a step further. I'll say telemedicine has advanced more in the last 6 weeks than it has in 144 years, which is when we got the thing called the telephone. So to Dr. Klausner's point, we could have been conducting telemedicine at home with us as a patient and our doctor on the other end of the phone for 144 years. There's nothing fabulously new about the iPhone 11 that allows us to do telemedicine. It's just, we now have a compelling reason to do it. There's some business models that support it. It's not illegal in certain states. So lo and behold, telemedicine is doing really, really well in this environment, and presumably it will continue to do so, and won't rubber band back to being kind of an afterthought the way it was 3 months ago.
Sure, sure. And we already have a couple of questions, but I want to get one in prior to that. It sounds to me like what you're saying, some of the big winners, public health, telemedicine, and vaccinations, hopefully in the long run. And I know both Llewellyn and Dr. Klausner have been working with startups that emerged out of the COVID-19 crisis, either businesses that pivoted or entrepreneurs that started up. I'm interested in hearing what you thought in terms of their ability to scale up quickly to meet this crisis, and what were some of the roadblocks in the way as they tried to do that. Dr. Klausner, I see you nodding. What you want to you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think, I mean, from our experience with the, Corva curative venture, I mean, there were three areas of roadblocks. One was just the, supply chain. So we've heard all about, the supply chain from, shortages of jobs, to shortages of test tubes, to shortages to the transport media, to all the different steps. So, I do a lot of interviews with different journalists, and, most people just have a very poor understanding of, what it goes in to perform a diagnostic test, to actually, obtain a clinical specimen and then test that in a way that is reliable and accurate. And there's a lot of different steps and a lot of different ingredients, some very, basic, like a cotton swab, and some, much more complicated, like certain kind of, DNA or RNA or molecular, primers that are, have to be manufactured specifically for the virus. So supply chain, and our global supply chain was hugely disrupted. And, to be effective, people had to be incredibly flexible and light on their feet. And that's why some of these newer entrepreneurial laboratories that were not, wedded to their vendors or embedded in, government or academic or institutional systems where every single vendor has to be, pre-approved and onboarded, and they don't have the dynamic to be able to change on an hour-to-hour basis. But it can take months at UCLA, for example, to bring on a new vendor for a cotton swab. And that what was a big issue, and the entrepreneurs are much more flexible able to deal with that. The second area was in staffing. So to staff clinical laboratories, you need certain kind of professionals who have certifications and education and passed all sorts of regulatory trainings. And we are fortunate in Southern California. We have a large number of people in that sector, but continue to staff up with trained, qualified personnel is definitely a challenge. And then the third is the regulatory landscape. So unbeknownst to people, and probably an unintended consequence, was when the federal government declared this a public health emergency, that somewhat inadvertently made this issue of COVID-19 a certain kind of classification within the FDA regulatory system. So for decades, laboratories have been able to develop their own tests called laboratory developed tests. FDA does not get involved with the development, validation, or even commercialization of those laboratory developed tests if they're only used in that laboratory, if they're not sold as a test to other companies. But because this federal emergency was declared, COVID-19 became a class 3 laboratory test or class 3 device. So that required the FDA by law to get very involved with approval of these tests, even though they were done in this unique laboratory setting. And that presented a lot of hurdles, and the FDA had to get involved with review of a step-by-step basis. And that's why we saw a very slow initial uptake into the availability and marketing of these tests. And that's why we're still at a very difficult place where people can't do a home collection. People can do a home swab for their 23andMe, for their Ancestry.com, but not yet do we have an approved home, test for COVID-19. The technology's there, the test works great. People surprisingly can swab their mouth appropriately, but the regulatory hurdles are still present. So it's going to take some serious, policy changes as we prepare for COVID-20 or the, next epidemic in terms of how we can, enable ourselves to respond more quickly and more effectively.
Llewellyn?
Yeah, I think Dr. Klausner actually covered a lot of like the immediate issues really well. I think one of the things that concerns me is more of a medium to long term issue, in that we've seen a lot of really great ideas with companies either to start something up or to pivot to something that's relevant to COVID, and investors are very open to supporting those things. But this kind of again comes into the question of what comes next. We've been very fortunate in Los Angeles over the last kind of 5 to 6 years to see a kind of concerted effort from both public and private sectors to increase the visibility and the opportunities for biotechnology in the region. And we've made some great strides in that. We're not quite, where we want to be yet, but we're very fortunate that we have a number of incubators and co-working lab facilities where, these companies right now have been able to kind of get set up and get their R&D up and running. But where the rubber hits the road, very similar to what Dr. Klausner was saying in terms of the regulatory environment, as those companies start getting closer to a clinically viable product, something that they want to get into, formal clinical trials with, they need to access regulated facilities, things with GMP, things with vivariums for animal testing, and these are very expensive, very frankly takes a long time to come online facilities that we are very short of in the LA area. So we kind of have this emergent bottleneck maybe a year or two down the line in the future, where in an optimistic scenario, we have these great companies and they're making really good progress. They're going to get to a point where they're going to need to be able to take that next stage. And there's definitely a real estate challenge there, as well as all the issues of, the trained staff and regulatory consultants and people, as Dr. Klausner alluded to. There's a lot of very specialized folks need to come in and work on those kind of projects as they move towards the clinic. So there's definitely challenges ahead, for sure. And my hope is that I think the leaders of this region have seen the value of this work, and hopefully will continue to support an expansion of the facilities that really underpin the success of our industry.
Yeah, I really would love to dive more into that. We're a little past 11:45, so I want to make sure I get to some of the questions that people sent in. And I think let me just go ahead here. It says, for years, people have talked about a nursing shortage. Now we have volunteers, retirees, and others with medical experience being activated in places. How do you build up the necessary expertise? And I think you were just talking to us, Klausner, and how can you still emphasize hospitals and also add on more community level health service investments? And I think this went to a lot of what you were talking about, Dr. Klausner, right?
Yeah, so I think, we need to strategize. So, the immediate response has been to, graduate medical students, 3 months early from medical school and certify them as physicians to get them into the hospitals. It's not any kind of medium or long-term solution. So, we need to, make nursing school free. So medical schools, famously, some have become free in terms of free tuition now. So we need to invest and understand that medical, nursing, laboratory technician, schools are not just, training for those individuals where that individual is going to benefit by having, a job, but is actually, part of our, societal investment to have, the type of people that we need at a large enough level with large enough skill set to be able to, take care of us. And as Jay said, our population is only aging and our healthcare needs are only increasing. So I think, there's got to be a vision there that we can build that service. We have to, make investments in things like, a public health core. So I didn't mention, so early in my career, I was an epidemic intelligence service officer, EIS. It's kind of like the CIA of public health, where we do outbreak investigations. We're the front line in terms of, figuring out what's going on, identifying, coming up with control interventions. That program has been funded at 50 people a year since 1951. And, it's absurd that, one, no one knows about this program, and two, we've allowed as a society our, public health training programs and our infrastructure to erode so much, over time. So I think we need to invest in the people. We need to invest in their training. We've seen governors in many states, allow people whose licenses have expired to return back to work. We've seen people, whose licenses are about to expire have, 12 months added on to their current certification. Those are all short-term fixes, but we really need to, look at our system for accreditation and licensure and, greatly open that up to build up the workforce.
Llewellyn, did you want?
No, I just want to agree. I think something Dr. Klaus has said earlier really stuck with me, and it's about how we really value individuals within the system, and I think we've very much gone down the last 20 years this rabbit hole of economic productivity above all else, and like many other industries, healthcare has been hollowed out from the middle, and frankly, going forwards, we need to find better ways to make sure that we ascribe value to people like nurses and generalist doctors and primary care physicians, people who aren't at the top of that totem pole presently, to make sure that they are valued, that we do have adequate numbers of people being trained, and that once you've been trained, there's an actual career that you can make a living doing at the end of it, even when there's not a pandemic happening. So I think, I just want to agree with all that.
Jay?
Well, I'll make a comment and a prediction. My prediction is I bet that number is more than 51 a year from now. I bet that agency is staffed at more than 51 people as we take stock of this. But I also think, and I wrote it in the chat when I saw the question come up, I think another part of this is, look what Uber has been able to do with just kind of moving a pool of labor around a particular population center. We get drivers to where we need to get drivers. We can't overnight increase the pool of the human resources we need to be ready for this kind of a situation. We can kind of, over a decade or so, we can import our way out of it. We might be able to make things easier for certain professions to get through schooling. But the other way of doing this, and you're seeing some interesting business models come up where we can kind of think about these labor pools, whether it's doctors, whether it's nurses, whether it's drivers of vehicles, and we can kind of move them around the city where they're most needed. Not every hospital on any given day is equally hit. So how do we get let's think about this as fluid pools of labor. And if we have the technology to know who needs the labor on Tuesday afternoon differently than who needs the labor on Wednesday morning, let's deploy the labor where it's needed. That's another thing that technology can help us with. We know how to solve that problem. The tech community knows how to solve that problem. We've done it with several other comparable business models. Let's think about it with respect to a labor shortage that was already really bad, by the way, 5 minutes before COVID. So it's not like we were just flush with nurses in every hospital in America. Quite the opposite. Every hospital in America had an acute nursing shortage 5 minutes before COVID. It just got worse. So let's think about other ways to tackle this problem as well. And technology can kind of jump in and be part, not all, but part of the solution.
Another question was whether or not there would be interest in the focus on technology aimed at improving sanitation process of this. I mean, everybody's washing their hands now, buying Clorox, disinfecting everything. You see that? Either Llewellyn or Jay?
We have a lot of companies, a lot of companies that we've looked at, and maybe some that we haven't invested in. That maybe I saw a company a year and a half ago, and they had a promise of making part of the healthcare system cleaner, less hospital-acquired infections, less infection period, might not have seen the urgency of that a year and a half ago. And those kind of companies are going to be in the catbird seat right now and in the near future, as what hospital is not going to look at that at the top of its list of things that it might invest in now. And it might have been a little bit lower, sadly, a couple years ago, a couple months ago.
Right. Llewellyn?
Yeah, and just to reiterate, there's definitely a number of startups we've seen and come across that are working on disinfectant technologies, antibacterial, antiviral, cleanliness ideas. I recommend everyone read Florence Nightingale's seminal 1857 book, Notes on Nursing. There's no substitute for soap and bleach yet. But again, this is a part of, I think, our healthcare system that we've kind of got away from first principles. We've been talking in different contexts about the end of the antibiotic era and how that's kind of coming upon us. And this is really a preview of that. This is what a world without these rapidly cheap, accessible drugs that kill off infections, can look like. And so, yes, we need to make sure that we focus on these medical technologies of vaccines and antibacterials and antivirals. But we also really need to kind of take a step back and look at some of the practices we frankly have abandoned, such as good cleanliness. It's actually a big issue. And but again, we're seeing all kinds of, mostly in, actually, I won't even say mostly, but robotics companies and other people who are looking at, sanitation things. And I think there's a lot of value in that, especially in these environments, like hospitals. We know there's a problem with hospital-acquired infections long before COVID. We need hospitals to be places where people can get better rather than get sicker. And I think this really kind of, puts a bright flag in that issue. And, yeah, for sure. We're definitely seeing some really interesting ideas around that space.
Well, we're about coming to the end, and you guys are also illuminating. We could talk for a lot longer, I'm sure. But I just wanted to give you all a chance to, if there was some final things you wanted to say. And we actually had one question from a viewer who was curious about Dr. Klausner, the startup that you're working on. They wanted to know what the name was of that. I don't know if it was the Corva Curative or something else you had spoken to. So maybe we'll start with you, Dr. Klausner, and you could let them know.
Sure. Well, I think the current version of the startup is called Curative Inc. And Curative develops new testing technologies. Have some brilliant people working there. They pivoted right now to the COVID-19, but they've been also looking at new means for sepsis detection. So, in the hospital, and a major cause of, early death and mortality is sepsis, which is overwhelming bacterial infection. And one of the problems is it takes hours, sometimes days, to diagnose that, to actually detect what the cause of that sepsis is, and then give targeted therapy for that. So they're, working to develop tools that within minutes to hours, you can actually identify what the cause of that sepsis is. So, part of the revolution in molecular biology and microfluidics and information technology all coming together in the same space, can allow for kind of novel, rapid microbial detection systems that can give important clinical answers in real time. But I'm definitely glad that Llewellyn mentioned soap and water. So let's not at the basics there and think about how we can promote this foundational public health practice of washing your hands before you eat, washing your hands after you use the restroom, and getting hand washing or sanitizing facilities in all our public spaces. And when I grew up in the New York City area, we had public washrooms, we had public drinking fountains, and that was for public health. That's why it was out there, so people would get access to clean drinking water and a place to wash their hands.
Jay?
I cannot do better than hand washing, so I'm gonna end on the same note.
Okay. Llewellyn, did you want to get the final word here?
Sure. No, I mean, this has obviously been an extremely, strange situation we've all found ourselves in. But, I think that one of the things that I take a lot of heart from is this is something that's going to have an end. And we have the opportunity now to think about what life looks after that end. And I'm just personally really inspired by all the folks that we've been working with and we've been talking to, including, the folks on this call today. There's just so many people have just jumped in and started working the problem, applying, real scientific thinking to it. And, I think there's a lot of opportunity to make some really positive changes to how we think about how we run things going forward. So, thanks for this opportunity. Thanks, guys, for all joining us. It's been fun.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Take care.